The last person I expected to accuse me of killing my wife was my own daughter. Not the doctors, not the nurses, not the neighbors who watched ambulances come and go during those final months. My daughter. She waited until everyone was gathered around my wife's casket. Until relatives, co-workers, church friends, and lifelong neighbors had formed a quiet line to pay their respects. Then she looked directly into my eyes, calmly, almost confidently, and said words that stopped an entire funeral. "You're the reason she's gone. My name is Nicholas Calloway. I'm 64 years old, and until that moment, I believed grief was the worst pain a man could endure. I was wrong. There is something even worse. Being blamed for the death of the woman you spent 40 years trying to keep alive. My wife, Eleanor, wasn't supposed to die that spring. Her doctors were optimistic after the surgery. The cancer had responded. The scans looked encouraging. We had even started talking about taking the train through the Canadian Rockies once she recovered. She bought a travel guide. She highlighted restaurants she'd wanted to visit. That book was still sitting on her nightstand when I came home from the hospital alone. Our daughter, Sabrina, was 36, successful, sharp, always the smartest person in every room, or so she liked everyone to believe. She lived 2 hours away with her husband, Derek, and rarely visited unless Eleanor specifically asked. Every missed weekend had an explanation. Work, traffic, the children, business trips. Eleanor never complained. She'd simply smile and say, "She's building her life." I wanted to believe that. Maybe because it hurt less. The morning of the funeral was unusually bright. Eleanor always said sunshine made people kinder. Nearly 300 people came. Former students, neighbors, members of the community orchestra she'd volunteered with for nearly 20 years. Families she'd quietly delivered meals to after illnesses. One by one, they shared stories I'd never heard. I realized I'd only known one version of my wife. The rest of the world had known someone extraordinary. The service itself was beautiful, exactly as Eleanor had planned: simple flowers, soft piano music, no dramatic speeches. She hated unnecessary attention. After the pastor finished speaking, guests began approaching the casket one last time. I stood beside it thanking people for coming. That's when Sabrina stepped forward. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried all morning. She stared at Eleanor's face for several long seconds, then turned toward me. Everyone assumed she was about to hug me. Instead, she spoke loudly enough for the entire chapel to hear. "You're the reason Mom is dead." The room froze. Someone behind me gasped. I honestly thought I'd miss it. "What? You heard me?" Her voice never shook. "If you hadn't been so selfish, she'd still be alive." I searched her face for any sign this was grief talking. There wasn't one, only anger, years of it. "What are you talking about? You convinced her to refuse the experimental treatment." "I know you did." The accusation hit like a punch. "I didn't. You always controlled everything." She took another step closer. "Even her last decision." People began whispering. The pastor looked as stunned as I felt. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Eleanor made that decision herself." "No, you made it for her." My chest tightened, because that wasn't just untrue. It was the exact opposite of reality. The experimental treatment had been offered. Eleanor had spent 3 weeks researching it herself. She had spoken to specialists, read every medical paper she could understand. Then she told me something I'll never forget. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left inside another hospital hoping for 6 more months. I want to spend it with you." I begged her to reconsider. Twice. She kissed my forehead both times and said, "Promise me you'll let this be my choice." I had. Reluctantly. Now our daughter was turning that promise into evidence against me. She looked around the chapel. "I hope everyone here knows. My father chose convenience over my mother's life." A murmur swept across the room. I could barely breathe. Then, something happened that made Sabrina's confidence vanish. A woman I'd never seen before stood up from the third row. She looked to be in her early 50s. Professional, composed, she carried a slim black leather portfolio. She walked straight toward us. "Excuse me." Her voice was calm. "Are you Sabrina Calloway?" Sabrina frowned. "Wes." The woman nodded once. "My name is Monica Reeves. I'm the patient advocate your mother met privately during her final month." Sabrina looked confused. "I've never heard of you." "I know. Your mother specifically asked that you wouldn't." Monica slowly removed a sealed ivory envelope from her portfolio. Across the front, written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, were 8 words. "For Sabrina. Open only if she blames Nicholas." The color drained from Sabrina's face. Her hands began to tremble. For the first time all day, she looked frightened. Nobody moved. Even the soft piano music playing through the chapel speakers seemed to disappear. Sabrina stared at the envelope as though it might explode in her hands. She looked at Monica. What is this? Monica didn't answer immediately. She simply held the envelope a little closer. Your mother gave this to me 23 days before she passed away. She made me promise I would only deliver it if you publicly blamed your father. The silence became almost unbearable. I looked at Monica. I never knew about this. I know. Eleanor insisted you couldn't. Sabrina slowly accepted the envelope. Her confidence was gone. What's inside? I've never opened it. My promise was to protect it. Sabrina turned the envelope over. The wax seal was still intact. Her own name was written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. She swallowed, then carefully broke the seal. Inside, there were 2 handwritten pages and a flash drive. She unfolded the first page. Her lips moved silently as she read. Within seconds, the color disappeared from her face. She skipped to the second page. Halfway through, her breathing became uneven. A tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. She stopped reading. No. She whispered it so quietly that only those closest could hear. No. Monica spoke gently. Keep reading. Sabrina shook her head. I can't. You need to. And everyone in the chapel watched, not out of curiosity anymore, out of concern. Finally, Sabrina continued. As she reached the final paragraph, her knees nearly gave out. Derek rushed forward to steady her. She didn't respond. She simply stared at the pages in complete disbelief. I couldn't stand it anymore. What did she write? Sabrina looked at me. For the first time that day, there wasn't anger in her eyes. There was fear. Real fear. Monica quietly asked, would you like me to read it aloud? Sabrina slowly nodded. She couldn't speak. Monica unfolded Eleanor's letter. Her voice was calm, steady. My beautiful Sabrina, if you're reading this, then you've done exactly what I feared grief would make you do. You've blamed your father. Please stop. Immediately. A painful silence filled the chapel. Monica continued. Your father begged me to accept the experimental treatment. Twice. He cried harder than I did. He offered to sell our home if money became a problem. He even contacted hospitals in 3 different states after I had already made my decision. My chest tightened. I remembered every phone call, every hospital, every sleepless night. I refused, not because your father wanted me to, because I wanted to spend my remaining months living, instead of surviving inside hospital walls. Monica paused briefly before continuing. Nicholas honored my decision even though it broke his heart. That is what love looks like. Several people quietly wiped away tears. The pastor lowered his head. Monica turned to the second page. The real reason I'm writing this letter isn't to defend your father. It's because there is something you've never known. Sabrina looked down. She already knew what came next. Whatever Eleanor had written, she had clearly never expected it. 6 months ago, you visited me while your father was buying groceries. You asked me a question you thought I'd never tell him. The chapel became completely silent. You asked me whether I planned to leave the lake house to you before I died, because Derek had already spoken with a real estate developer. Gasps echoed around the room. I looked at Sabrina. She couldn't even lift her head. You said selling it quickly would help pay off your mortgage and finally give your family the lifestyle you'd always wanted. My hands began shaking. The lake house. During chemotherapy, when I told you I hadn't decided anything, you became angry. You said, Dad won't know what to do with it anyway. And my knees weakened. I remembered that afternoon. Sabrina had stayed only 20 minutes. She hugged her mother, told me she'd visit again soon. I had believed every word. Monica's voice softened. That conversation hurt me far more than my illness ever did. Not because you asked about money. Because you asked before I'd even finished fighting for my life. The room was completely still. No whispers, no movement. Only the sound of Sabrina quietly crying. Then Monica reached the final page. One last thing. The flash drive inside this envelope contains a video I recorded 3 weeks before I died. I made it because I knew written words wouldn't be enough if grief turned into blame. If you're watching it, please remember that truth matters more than pride. Monica looked toward the pastor. There is a television in the fellowship hall. She held up the flash drive. Eleanor asked me to play it immediately. Sabrina suddenly stood. No, her voice cracked. Please, not here. Monica looked at her kindly. Those were your mother's instructions. I can't. You can. Derek reached for Sabrina's hand. She pulled away. Her breathing had become frantic. I had never seen my daughter look so terrified. Monica handed the flash drive to the church's sound technician. Within minutes, the large television at the front of the fellowship hall flickered to life. The screen remained black for a few seconds. Then, Eleanor appeared. She was wearing her favorite blue cardigan, sitting on the porch swing we had built together 20 years earlier. She smiled gently into the camera. Then, instead of looking at Sabrina, she looked straight into the lens, straight at me. And the very first words she spoke made every person in that room stop breathing. "Nicholas, if you're seeing this, it means our daughter never told you what happened the day she asked me to change my will." The screen flickered once. Then Eleanor smiled, not the weak smile she'd worn during chemotherapy, a real one, warm, gentle. The kind that had convinced me everything would somehow be okay, even when it wasn't. She looked directly into the camera. "Nicholas, if you're watching this, I miss you already." I covered my mouth. Her voice sounded so alive. Around me, people quietly wiped away tears. Then she looked away from the camera for a moment, towards someone sitting beside it. She smiled again. "I know you're trying not to cry." That had been me. I remembered the day. She'd insisted on recording something. I assumed it was a message for birthdays or anniversaries. She'd sent me to make coffee while Monica helped her set everything up. I never knew what she'd recorded. Now, I was finding out with everyone else. Eleanor looked back into the camera. "But this part isn't really for you. It's for Sabrina." The chapel became completely silent. Eleanor's smile faded, not into anger, into sad. "My beautiful girl, I've replayed our last difficult conversation 100 times. I kept asking myself where I lost you." As Sabrina stood frozen near the front pew, unable to look away, Eleanor continued, "You weren't born caring about money. You weren't born measuring people by houses, vacations, or bank accounts. When you were 12, you gave your birthday money to a classmate because her father had lost his job." Several people smiled through tears. "I remember, so does your father." Sabrina slowly closed her eyes. Eleanor continued softly, "When you were 16, you spent every Saturday helping me serve meals at the community kitchen. You never asked whether the people deserved help. You simply helped." She paused. "I've spent years wondering what happened to that girl." A tear rolled down Sabrina's face. Then Eleanor took a slow breath. "The answer came 6 months ago." The room grew still again. "You visited while your father was shopping. You weren't there to ask how I was feeling. You weren't there because you missed me. You came because you wanted certainty." Sabrina quietly whispered, "I'm sorry," but only those standing closest heard it. Eleanor continued, "You asked me if I would sign the lake house over before I died. You already had a buyer. You had already calculated what your share would be." Derek looked at the floor. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Eleanor's voice remained calm. "I said no. You became angry. You told me." She looked directly into the camera. "That Dad would probably die soon after me anyway." A gasp swept across the chapel. Several people covered their mouths. I felt the air leave my lungs. "No, not Sabrina. Not my little girl." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly before continuing, "I've forgiven you, but forgiveness doesn't erase truth." She reached for something beside her. It was a small leather notebook. She held it up. "I started writing after that day, not because I wanted evidence, because I wanted to make sure your father never blamed himself." She smiled sadly. "Nicholas has spent his entire life believing every problem is his responsibility. I knew, if you accused him after I was gone, he'd believe you." My eyes filled with tears, because she was right. Even after Sabrina blamed me, part of me wondered whether I'd failed somehow, whether I should have fought harder, whether I should have ignored Eleanor's wishes and forced another treatment. She knew me that well. Eleanor leaned slightly closer to the camera. "So let me say this clearly. My death was my decision. My illness was nobody's fault. And your father gave me the greatest gift anyone could ever give another person. He respected my choice. Even when it shattered his own heart, I couldn't hold back anymore." I broke down completely. Helen quietly wrapped an arm around my shoulders. The chapel remained silent except for soft crying. Then, Eleanor looked directly into the camera again. "But there is something neither of you knows." Every head lifted. Even Monica looked surprised. "I've kept one secret. I hoped I could tell you in person. I couldn't." She reached into her cardigan pocket, then held up a folded document. "This is why Monica is here." She's carrying the original. Monica's expression changed. Slowly, she opened her leather portfolio. Inside was another sealed envelope. She looked genuinely confused. I didn't know this was separate. Eleanor smiled on the screen. I asked you not to open it. You've kept your promise. Monica carefully removed the envelope. Across the front were 7 handwritten words. Open only after the video ends. The video continued. Sabrina, if you've apologized before this part, I'm proud of you. If you haven't, you still have time. Then Eleanor smiled one last time. Because what Monica is holding will change both of your lives. The screen faded to black. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Monica slowly broke the seal. She unfolded the document. Read the first page. Then suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened. She immediately looked at me, then at Sabrina. Finally, she whispered words that left the entire chapel frozen. Eleanor wasn't protecting an inheritance. She was protecting a secret that only 3 people in the world ever knew. She slowly lowered the papers, her voice barely above a whisper. And according to this document, Nicholas, Sabrina isn't biologically your daughter. No one spoke. The words hung in the air like something impossible. I looked at Monica, then at Sabrina, then back at the document. I'm sorry, I think you read that wrong. Monica slowly shook her head. I wish I had. She handed me the papers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold them. Across the top was Eleanor's handwriting. To Nicholas, the truth belongs to you now. I began reading. My dearest Nicholas, this is the hardest letter I've ever written. Not because I fear you'll stop loving Sabrina, but because I'm afraid you'll believe the last 40 years were a lie. They weren't. I swallowed hard. When Sabrina was 2 years old, you officially adopted her. You insisted no one would ever use the word stepdaughter in our home. You said, she's my little girl now. A memory hit me all at once. A tiny courthouse, a little girl in a yellow dress, holding my finger with both hands. The judge smiling as I signed adoption papers. I'd forgotten. Not because it wasn't important, because after that day, she had simply become my daughter. Always, Eleanor continued. Her biological father disappeared before she was born. He never met her. He never asked about her. You gave her everything he never did. The chapel was silent except for quiet sobbing. When Sabrina was old enough to understand, we planned to tell her together. Every year we delayed because it never seemed like the right moment. Eventually, it became the family secret neither of us knew how to begin. I slowly lowered the page. I remembered those conversations. Late at night, we always said, next year. Next year never came. Monica quietly said, there's another page. I continued. 6 months ago, after Sabrina asked about changing my will, I contacted the adoption attorney. Not because I wanted to remove her from the family, because I wanted advice about finally telling the truth. He reminded me of something I had forgotten. Love isn't protected by secrets. It's protected by honesty. I turned the final page. Nicholas, if Sabrina has blamed you today, please remember something before anger reaches your heart. She believes you're the only parent she's ever had. She has no idea another man even exists. She isn't guilty of forgetting who loved her. She's guilty of forgetting how she was loved. Tears blurred every word. Whether she carries your blood has never mattered. You became her father the day you chose her. Nothing, not biology, not betrayal, not grief, can erase 40 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, piano recitals, graduations, or the day you taught her to ride a bicycle while pretending not to notice she'd stopped needing you to hold the seat. I couldn't read any more. My voice broke. Sabrina was crying harder than anyone. She slowly walked toward me. Each step looked heavier than the last. She stopped only a few feet away. Her lips trembled. She shook her head. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I looked into her eyes. For the first time all day, I saw the frightened little girl who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms. I know. She collapsed into a chair. I accused you. And you aren't even... She couldn't finish. I quietly walked over, knelt beside her, and took both of her hands. No. I smiled through tears. She looked up, confused. I squeezed her hands. A father isn't the man whose name appears first on a birth certificate. A father is the man who stays. The man who shows up. The man who loses sleep when his daughter has a fever. The man who cheers louder than anyone at her graduation. The man who walks her down the aisle. I smiled sadly. I've already done all of those things. So don't tell me I'm not your father. She burst into tears. I'm so sorry. I know. I was horrible. You were grieving. I was cruel. You were hurting. I believed something that wasn't true. I gently wiped away one of her tears. So did I, she frowned. What do you mean? I believed I had somehow failed your mother. Eleanor had spent her final weeks making sure neither of us carried the wrong burden. She had succeeded. Monica quietly cleared her throat. There is one final document. She handed it to Sabrina. It wasn't legal paperwork. It was a folded sheet of stationery. Across the top, Eleanor had written one last request. Sabrina opened it. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. Don't spend years apologizing. Spend years becoming the kind of daughter your father deserves. Visit him. Call him. Eat dinner together. Celebrate birthdays. Tell him stories about me when he misses me. Grief already steals enough time. Don't let pride steal the rest. Love, Mom. 8 months later. Every Sunday at exactly 5 o'clock. Someone knocked on my front door. It was always Sabrina. Sometimes she brought homemade soup. Sometimes she brought old family photographs. Sometimes she brought nothing except herself. We'd sit on the back porch where Eleanor and I used to drink coffee. We laughed, we cried, we remembered. One rainy afternoon, Sabrina quietly handed me a framed photograph. It showed the three of us at the county fair. She was 7, missing her front tooth, sitting on my shoulders. On the back she'd written one sentence. The best father I ever had was the one who chose me. I keep that photograph beside Eleanor's favorite chair, because every time I look at it, I'm reminded that families aren't built by blood. They're built by the people who choose to love each other, even after the hardest truths are finally spoken.